Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Sophia and I operate Sammy Down Designs out of Missouri City, Texas. So this week we are doing a little mid-century modern desk. My husband found this on Facebook Marketplace after I had told him I was looking for a mid-century modern desk for the office. And what he proceeded to tell me was that it wasn't for me. When he showed it to me, he said, "I need a desk so I can play video games on. Will you refinish it for me?" And of course, I had to say yes because he never asks. And the thing has been put through the ringer. I'm not quite sure what happened to it. So we're going to do our best to give it a fantastic refresh. And I hope you join me for the ride.
Here it is. This thing is pretty beat up. I actually did not think it was this beat up when he went out to go get it. Obviously, it needs new veneer on the top. The drawer fronts don't look too bad, but the finish on this is really peculiar. It's almost like somebody tried to brush on lacquer. It is very thick, but very gritty, lumpy, bumpy. And the desk is also wobbly. So I know there are some structural issues that we need to address. In addition to the veneer top, in addition to these drawers that are just not working correctly, this thing is also filthy. Apparently, the people that were selling it bought it to refinish it themselves, never got around to it. According to them, they bought it this way. That's all I have on the history of this desk. It is a Flanders brand. Flanders was a mid century modern brand that actually specialized in office furniture, and most of their desks were laminate top. Now, just because of the edge actually being wood, I'm thinking this was not a laminate top, that there was most likely walnut veneer on the top. Judging by some of the rings and the stains on the top, I think whoever had this actually did go ahead and use it as a desk despite the veneer on the top being gone. So even though this is not a valuable piece, these desks, when they are intact, go for about 350 to 400 online. I still want to do it justice and to do my husband justice for spending money on this and do the best I can to actually refinish it properly. So first things first, as always, take off the hardware. The drawer handles are thankfully not built in, so they were really easy to unscrew, and I just tapped them loose so I could refinish those separately, which is a big help. I went ahead and numbered not only the drawers, but numbered the corresponding handles. That way everything fits later on. After that was taken care of, I started the cleaning process. I used my diluted simple green spray. I sprayed it on liberally because, like I said in the intro, this thing was really dirty. Let it soak in a little bit and then used my Ryobi brush attachment to scrub as much of the dust and grime as I possibly could. When I was spraying the top, I got an inkling as to what may have happened to this desk because as soon as I sprayed it, it smelled like a straight up hamster cage, a dirty one. So I think there might have been a critter issue with this desk, or a hamster lived in it, a mouse lived in it. I don't quite know, but you could definitely smell that there was some critter waste, shall we say, still lingering. After I wiped the simple green back and allowed everything to dry for the most part, I wanted to try to take the desk apart as much as I possibly could because that would really make it easier on myself with the sanding process later. So I unscrewed the legs to the left and went about trying to figure out why the wobble was there. The brass caps on this desk were pretty much obliterated. They were tarnished and scratched up, and this one even had basically started coming apart. So I was going to try to find some replacements, but that proved a little bit more difficult to find this size on Amazon than I thought. When I moved over to the longer legs, I thought I would just be able to unscrew those as well, but they are actually part of the frame. And when I went to shake them, I could tell they were really loose. So when I took a closer look, this board here had split all the way across, and the leg had been pulled off of the top. So this is where the instability of the desk was really coming from. Besides the crack on the board, I could immediately see that the leg had split. It wasn't completely split, but it did need to be reglued. So after all of that was said and done, I got yet another clue that reinforced my thought that there was some sort of pest issue here. You could see that there are some chewed up wood shavings. It really does look like hamster bedding. But also the last drawer rail was pretty chewed up. So something was living in this desk. Next order of business was to glue the wood that had come loose on the frame and to glue the cracked leg. So applied some wood glue to both sides, clamped it, and allow the glue to dry overnight. Up next, I started stripping back the piece. I used mainly my Surf Prep sander, my carbide scraper, and a little help from some lacquer thinner and steel wool to strip back the entire piece. As I was stripping the drawers and the legs, I noticed that there were some really deep gouges in the veneer, and they really look like somebody had used an orbital sander with like a 40 grit to quote unquote refinish this at some point. You can see them there. Those scratches are pretty deep and they are in a repetitive pattern, not to mention that there's veneer burned throughout the drawer fronts. So my next order of business was to see if I can sand through the scratches. Now, I knew that the veneer was already wearing pretty thin, especially at the edges. So I had to proceed with caution. And because there were so many scratches, I opted to try this first and see if I can't sand some of them out instead of going straight to applying steam from an iron. If I could sand most of it out, then I could default to the iron. But I wanted to see how far I could get with just sanding. So I really took my time with this. I proceeded carefully. I started with, I believe it was a 120 grit and my sanding block, and just kind of lightly made passes. If I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere, I would take it down to an 80 grit and I would just kind of flip back and forth through grits until I could see that I was making some headway. Now, ultimately, after almost an entire day of sanding 3 or 4 drawer fronts, I got all the scratches out. So they were pretty deep and I didn't know if I could salvage these drawer fronts, but with a little time, patience, and persistence, I am happy to say that the scratches did in fact come out. By the time I was done with sanding, I knew I was dealing with at least 3 different types of wood. The wood of the short legs was one type of wood. The wood on the broken board and on the front side was a different type of wood. And then, of course, you have the walnut veneered casing of the desk. Not to mention that I still have the mystery wood on the top. So as I was working through all of this, going through my mind was, how do I stain all of these different types of woods to bring them close to each other in color? I don't mind some variation. In fact, some projects I actually do seek it out, but this was something that I just kind of wanted to have a cohesive look. Out of all the drawers, this bottom drawer, which also happens to be the deepest, had sustained the most veneer damage, and even the substrate, which was actually worn smooth. So I had to rebuild that entire lip, and I used Mohawk's epoxy putty in the color walnut to do this. So I applied the epoxy putty, got it as smooth as I can, let it dry, which it dries really fast. It's a two-part, so you basically cut off as much putty as you need. You massage it together so the colors incorporate. One color is white, the other color is brown. So when you have everything mixed together, you can go ahead and start applying it. Now, this is really good for rebuilding corners, for fixing veneer chips. It has some density to it, so it's not going to be super easy to spread. But after a little while, you kind of get the idea of how to manipulate this stuff. When you are trying to figure out what the wood grain will look like, if you just refinish it with a clear coat, a really good trick is just wipe it down with mineral spirits, and that'll give you a pretty close estimate of what it would look like. I wanted to see what the legs, I had two of those boards, and what the walnut veneer on the drawer faces would look like if I were just to refinish with clear coat. And you can see that there's quite a bit of difference. The board and the legs have more of a yellow hue to them, whereas the walnut veneer, of course, pulls that really beautiful, rich brown red. So I had to figure out, when I choose my stains for this, how do I choose stains that will try to bring those colors closer together? So obviously you want to apply a darker, more rich stain on the lighter colored woods. And I just started with the legs, the handles, and that board. I decided to use General Finishes gel stain in the color Antique Walnut, and this was a good start. Gel stain application is really easy. Gel stain is thicker than a penetrating oil-based stain, so it doesn't seep into the wood fibers as much as a penetrating stain does. So it sits on the surface of the wood more so. It takes about 3 days for it to fully dry, depending on your environment, but if you read the can, General Finishes says about 3 days. You liberally apply it on the surface. When you're applying it, you're trying to basically press it into the wood fibers, and you're going to let it sit for, I'd say, I leave General Finishes on for about 5 minutes. Now, it does dry a lot quicker than Varathane gel stain, so I need to watch that sometimes. You don't want to let it dry because then it gets tacky and it makes it harder to wipe back. But as soon as you have your gel stain applied, wait a few minutes, and then you just wipe it back. So as it dries, it's going to lighten up a bit in color, but the color that you have after you wipe it back is really close to what you'll end up with when it's dry. Next step is my favorite step in the whole process, and that is color matching and color blending. So anywhere you have wood putty, filler, you need to try to blend that into the surrounding veneer. So I am going to color match that strip of wood putty that you see there. Now, the reason some of the veneer looks darker is that I've just sprayed a little bit of vinyl sealer to see what the color would look like after it's finished. So this gives me some direction as far as what colors to actually put on the wood putty to blend into what eventually will be a finished product. I'm using my furniture touch-up kit. These are acrylic resin paints, I believe, and just a cheap little artist brush to do most of the work. I believe with some of this, I ended up using my Blend-All sticks through Mohawk and some of the fine graining pens. The reason this is my favorite step is because once you've done this a few times and you can see that it's actually not as hard as you might think, it really opens the door for you to take on more advanced projects. So if initially you would have veneer damage and you would fill it in with Bondo, which is really hard to stain and color match, and then you would paint over a piece, now instead of using Bondo, you can use wood putty that stains, and you can color match the area to the surrounding veneer and actually save the piece and try to restore it back to its natural state as much as possible if that's what you're after. All right, let's deal with this top. So I have some walnut veneer from a previous client project. It is not the best walnut veneer, meaning that it's not beautifully figured. It is basic. So if you look at the top, the way I have it laid out here, the grain should have been running from left to right on your screen. I don't have enough veneer to run the wood grain that way. I do have enough veneer, however, to run it perpendicular, so vertical on your screen. And I think I'm just going to go ahead and do it. Again, this is a piece that is going to be staying in-house. I'm not going to be trying to sell this. It's going to be fine for the time being. And if down the road I find some really beautiful veneer that is worth the price and worth the effort to just reapply on this little desk, then I'll go ahead and do it then. For right now, I'm going to make what I have work for us. So what I am doing here is applying rubber cement. This is extremely stinky stuff. And at first I was like, oh, it's not that bad. I have my garage door open and a fan going. But then I was like, okay, yeah, stupid. Wear your respirator. So I did put my respirator on. But the way this stuff works is it's really thick. You apply it, just use a cheap brush because you'll end up having to throw it away anyway. You apply it on both sides of the surface. So you'll see me apply it on the back of the veneer as well. And you wait to the point where it's actually almost dry. It's slightly tacky, which takes about 15 to 20 minutes. And I know that's counterintuitive, right? So the first thing that you want to do is, while it's sticky, put the two surfaces together and call it good. Now I've done that. So again, this is a learning channel, not a teaching channel. What I found was if you rush it and it's not dry or almost dry, you're going to get bubbles. So what happens is as the glue is trying to dry between your surfaces, it's actually off-gassing and creating bubbles. So you want to let it dry almost completely. And then you can bring your two surfaces together. Now, the adhesion is almost instantaneous. So you don't want to mess this up. You don't really get a second chance at this. So I have a little technique that has worked really well for me in the past, which you'll see in a few minutes here. In order to avoid the veneer sticking to the table where I don't want it to, I like to place these round wooden dowels on the table. Now, what that's going to allow me to do is give me a chance to line everything up because it's not making contact, right? So it's not sticking yet. And remember, the surfaces are almost completely dry. And because there is no glue on the wooden dowels, the veneer's not sticking to the wooden dowels either. So once I have it lined up, I am going to use my veneer pressing tool and start from the middle of the surface. I'm going to make contact. I'm going to press the veneer down onto the table, and then I'm slowly going to start to slide those middle dowels out towards the periphery. And as I roll those further and further out, I am going to continue to press the veneer down. Hopefully, by the time I get to the edges, everything will be securely adhered. I will have no bubbles, and that'll be it. All I have to do next is just trim the excess veneer off of the perimeter. Okay, so my phone died and I didn't realize it when I was applying the gel stain to the veneer. So what I have gone ahead and done is already sanded it. I sanded through my grits, and for the top, since not all walnut is created equal, this particular veneer was very brown, almost a milk chocolate. I wanted to warm that up so I could match the rest of the desk. And what I ended up using for stain on the top was General Finishes Nutmeg. Again, links to all the products can be found in the description below. If you do choose to follow a link for a purchase, I earn a small commission, but it is free to you. After I had let the top dry for several days, I was ready to reassemble the desk. I wanted to have everything assembled before I actually finish the piece. And the reason being is I wanted to see how all of these different stain choices were actually vibing together. So after I put it together, I did notice that the top needed to warm up a little bit more. So I did do a second coat of the General Finishes Nutmeg on the top, and that seemed to really bring everything together. Now, the other thing I ended up doing was wanting to darken the handles just a little bit more. So for the handles, I applied Varathane in the color Dark Walnut, and that seemed to get the handles close to what I was envisioning. Last step before moving on to the finishing process, I wanted to freshen up the drawers a little bit. So I gave them a quick sand, made sure that they were clean and odor free. All right, let's finally finish this piece. So I am going to lacquer finish this piece. First thing we need to do is spray 2 coats of Easy Vinyl Sealer. And I've gone ahead and purchased the gallons. They are way more affordable in the long run than the rattle cans. The rattle cans of Mohawk run about $11 to $12 a pop. And for $50, you can get a gallon of either vinyl sealer or lacquer. So this is much more of a frugal financial choice. Definitely want to spend some time mixing the contents of the can. So when I opened the vinyl sealer, this was a brand new can. I looked inside and I could see straight to the bottom. It was a clear liquid and all of the sediment was settled at the bottom. The sediment is the flattener. And what flatteners do is they basically give texture and they dull down the sheen of vinyl sealer and lacquer. Now, if you don't mix it up well, you're going to get differences in sheen and it's just going to look patchy and streaky. I also always strain lacquer or vinyl sealer into my canister. Now, vinyl sealer can blush just like lacquer can. My weather conditions were actually ideal for spraying lacquer. I think my humidity level was like 36% and it was a nice cool day. So it was ideal. But I did go ahead and add just a few drops of lacquer retarder to both my vinyl sealer and my lacquer when I spray that later. And what that's going to do is it's going to slow down the drying process and allow any moisture that would have otherwise gotten trapped in the product to escape and spare you the heartache of having to deal with blush, which is just like a white, powdery fog almost that develops in your finish. Lacquer retarder was a game changer if you want to see me cry. All right, there was no crying, but watch my previous video. I'll link it in the description below. So here I am spraying my first coat of vinyl sealer. It is a nice light coat, not a wet coat. This stuff does dry really fast, even with the lacquer retarder. So by the time I get all the way around, it has already dried. Now, between every coat of vinyl sealer, I do a very light scuff sand. And what that does is it knocks back any texture that's developed either from spraying or any dust nibs that may have gotten caught. Ultimately, if you scuff sand lightly between every single layer of vinyl sealer and lacquer, you will get almost a glass finish in lacquer. This is kind of hard to tell on camera, but when I was looking at the handles and the legs, they still looked just slightly off hue. So I used a spray toner by Mohawk in the color Perfect Brown, and I just lightly fogged the legs and the handles just to make everything a little bit more cohesive. It was a very subtle change, but ultimately I was happy with the final result. With toner, if you stay too long in one area, you might develop a little bit of a shiny spot or maybe I don't want to call it a puddle, but yeah, I think you guys get the idea. So I went ahead and did a little scuff sand to break up any of those spots. And now the piece was finally ready for lacquer finish. So for the finish, I used Mohawk's pre-catalyzed lacquer in a satin finish. And again, I loaded it up into my Erlax 5700, and I ended up doing 2 coats everywhere and a third coat on the drawer fronts and the top. So the top and the drawer fronts had 3 coats, everything else had 2 coats. To smoothen out that last coat, because it does have a little bit of texture to it, I used a piece of brown paper grocery bag, kept it flat, and wiped the entire piece, and that will knock back any sort of texture. Home stretch, I tried to find replacement brass caps, but could not, so I ended up using Rust-Oleum's metallic line and the color gold to spray the existing brass caps. And honestly, they looked as good as new, except for that one that was kind of blown out. The color was a perfect match. So I ended up just putting those back on. If I find ones that fit later on, I'll end up replacing them, but these work just fine for now. So let's look back at the before. What a sad little desk. It had critter pee on it. It needed new veneer. The finish on this was just horrible. I literally think somebody tried to brush lacquer on it. The swirl marks from the orbital sander were intense. There were veneer chips and sand through marks everywhere. But I am actually really pleased with how this turned out. Let me show you. Here it is. What a transformation. This is really an ugly duckling story. I can't believe this is the same desk. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but honestly, I cannot believe how good this came out. The lacquer finish is the right choice. Those handles really set the piece off. The new veneer on the top, I like the fact that it's a little funky. I like that the orientation of the grain is not conventional. As always, thank you guys so much for sticking around. Thank you so much for all of your interaction, your comments, your shares, your subscribes. It really has helped my little channel grow, and the more interaction, the more content that I can continue to bring you guys, and we can learn together. Again, this is a learning channel, not a teaching channel. Till next time.